Thank you for coming, everyone. I'm super excited to introduce Caroline Groves and her assistant, Lilly. The last name I'm actually
Lilly Deeming.
Lilly Deeming. Coming all the way from England, extraordinary shoemaker, bespoke shoemaker. When you see her shoes, you can tell whose it is, which is fantastic. So happy to have you, and we're going to break it up so 6 o'clock to for maybe an hour, 30 minutes. We'll have a presentation, and then I'll have a little bit of questions for her, and then after that we'll break up, and then everybody can meet and greet, come and feel, view, talk to Caroline. Today, as you all know, FIT fashion, footwear and accessories design department is co-hosting the event with us. I'm sure you're all saw Sarah, but I'm so thankful for having the space to do it. So thank you to Sarah. And yeah, without, let's just dive right in.
I think you probably know, but I'm a bespoke shoemaker in the sort of truest sense of the word, in terms of we're making the lasts. We're specifically for every client and every type of shoe. We're designing specifically for each client. And so it's all about the engagement and the discussion and the speaking with the client. So I'll just tell you a little bit about this first of all, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my history. So I'm in the States pretty often these days because this is where my client base is essentially. And you can imagine traveling with lots of shoes and samples. It's pretty hard work all the time. And I don't get an awful lot of time to make samples. So we were coming over for a party a week or two ago that a client was hosting for us, and we just didn't have time to make samples. So we came up with this idea that they used to do years ago, just making a pullover. So it's not a real last and it's not a properly constructed shoe, but it just gave the opportunity to put a few ideas together that could be up for discussion with a client, different techniques. Could swap these ideas around. Just got 1 or 2 samples here, really just to show the breadth of work that we do. So what is pretty unusual really is that we do a hand welter construction, but taking it up onto a heel. Obviously historically it was done, but it's not very usual these days. So both of those boots are hand welted and have hand stitched soles. This is just a bit of a flight of fancy of mine, but I had over 100 hours of velvet handwork embroidery in it. And a shoe that's obviously not hand welted, a cemented shoe, but obviously, for a lighter weight, we do, the range. Personally, I'm a pattern maker and a closer. Lily's trading more in making, specifically hand welting. And how people so often ask, how did I get here? And, sometimes I don't know how I got here. Nothing was a conscious decision or a plan. But essentially, I grew up in a family with quite a number of craftspeople. Spent a lot of time with my grandmother as a child. She was a great silversmith and needlewoman. And, you don't realize when you're a child how much, you're just absorbing of the people around you. My father was a great craftsman and spent, half my childhood in his workshops. But I did have a great-grandfather who worked in the arts and crafts movement at the turn of the 19th century, and I suppose his influence sort of trickled down. But I left school at 16. I was just really didn't know what I wanted to do, and there wasn't the opportunity for me to stay at school or do any further education. And I spent a few years just really wandering around, hitchhiking around Europe, working in kibbutz, traveling on magic buses, just on my own with a backpack. And I suppose absorbing different things everywhere I went, and eventually came back, settled in Oxford, which this was in the punk era, and I got myself a job in a pub and a room in a pub to live in, and it was the first punk venue in Oxford, and I just loved the whole vibe of that whole thing. But I never was a punk myself. I've always, the same as I am with my clients now, I'm always an observer. So I was the one, you know, cutting clothes up and making clothes for punks who I was dressing, but I wasn't living the life myself. Eventually, I was married, just doing general sort of office work and things. And when I was pregnant with my first child, it was the first time that I sort of was at home with some time on my hands. And that's when I found myself sort of reverting to what I'd done as a child, to wanting to make things, and was particularly drawn to leather. I started going to a local saddler. I didn't want to be a saddler, but I wanted to learn some hand stitching techniques and learn more about leather. And I did run a little business for a while, making leather clothing and belts and bags and things. But I was introduced to a shoemaker who just moved out of London to my home area and was trying to get his business off the ground. Some of you will know his name. That was Bill Bird, who does very much orthopedic work. And he needed somebody to help him. And although I was in no way a shoemaker, I was so enthusiastic. And that started a long period working with Bill, where in the first few years he paid my childminding fees. And I didn't earn a wage, but I was investing in my apprenticeship, really, until a tipping point came and I was on a salary. I did 12 and 13 years with him. It's a great place to learn, because I learned, you know, there's not just one way to make a pair of shoes, and, you know, to rip things open and see what's in the guts of them, how they work. But, you know, I was craving doing something that was less about the client foot condition and more about technique and materials and colors. And an opportunity came up to take over a little, very old established bespoke women's shoemakers in the West End of London. And that began probably the hardest part of my life then. I was so incredibly naive. I really didn't know what it would take to run a business, find a client base, you know, do the accounts, do everything. And yes, so am I jumping? So yes, so during that period in London, it was hard. The previous clientele of the shoemakers were very dwindling, very elderly, and I needed to bring new clients in, but I just didn't know how to. So for cash flow purposes, I went to Lob, and a lot of you will know the name Lob, the famous West End shoemakers, and to Foster's, who unfortunately no longer exist, but they were on Jermyn Street in the West End. And I began to work with them, working as an outworker, as a closer for them, but being in London, working very closely with them and just loving everything about that West End hand welted, handcrafted men's shoes. Just honed the things that could be done with leather. I just loved that, and then had a realization I could take some of those elements of real craftsmanship and evolve them hopefully more into women's work. And slowly I picked up, 2 or 3 clients who was able to keep going. I'll move on a little bit more to the shoemaking in a moment, but Kiko had asked, did I have mentors during this time? I've been fortunate enough, there have been a number of mentors in my life, but quite honestly, I think most importantly, a couple, Neil McGregor and Valerie Michael. People in leatherworking circles will know McGregor and Michael. They lived not too far away from me, and in their workshops, I learned respect for craft, respect for leather, respect for tools, understanding leather, being discerning about leather for different purposes. And really, they taught me some really quite basic skills, but, just somehow live with me. They, I still refer to them, I still see them regularly. And yeah, I think they really are responsible for so much in my attitude to the way I work with leather. So, oh gosh, next page. So over the years, I have had to move a lot geographically, my workshops and my home. Things happen to us all in life, and people say you shouldn't bring the personal into business, but when you're a small business and you've got young families, things happen and you get sort of forced into different situations. So I've had some fantastic workshop spaces and homes, but currently this is my workshop space in my garden. It's the smallest workshop I've ever had, I think. But what it's done for me really is, Lilly and I were previously in 2,000 square foot of workspace, and so we had everything we could possibly have in there. When I knew I was leaving there, I just knew I wanted to put a lot of stuff behind me and get rid of a lot of the stuff I collected, because really I wasn't using it. I gave loads of stuff away, we sold some things, and now I feel sort of pared down to the essentials. And actually, it helps me to focus. Yeah, the other thing about the moving and the rural location has made it difficult to train apprentices. Where we are, there's no public transport.
It's in the middle of nowhere, basically.
And accommodation is expensive because it's a touristy area. And we all know this, young people have a passion, they want to come and learn, but then actually the reality of being removed from a city and there's no social life. And so most people have been with me have lasted sort of about 2 years and then been gone before. I'm beginning to benefit. Lily's the exception, thank goodness. Yes, so jumping on to a typical week for me, this is another issue really, because of where we're based. I have to travel a lot, so at least 2 days a week I will either be in London to see clients or maybe suppliers or outworkers. I rely on a little group of outworkers that have been with me for many, many years, and each has a specialism of some sort. So depending on what the job in hand is, I know which outworker it's going to go to. All the closing, all the pattern making, I do all the pattern making, a lot of the closing, Lily does some of the closing, but the making is done as outwork mainly. I don't like sending things. I like to go in person, sit down with the maker and go through every element. And for the same reason, my last makers, a lot of you will know Spring Lining, Northampton. Every new last, I go to their workshops and I've written out a specification. I take photographs of my clients' feet. I take designs of the type of shoe or boot that we want to make. We'll discuss, you know, where the upper needs to be touching the foot or where it doesn't. You know, we'll discuss the clip, the waist, the crank, as well as the pitch. We just try to cover everything. So a day out to go to, like, that's a whole day out, or to go to London is a whole day out, to go to an outworker is a whole day out. So at least 2 days of my week, I'm just in the car with maybe short meetings in between. And that, you know, I just crave to be in my workshop. I really do. And that does mean that the rest of the week and as much time as I can, weekends, and I'll be in the studio, but at least it's just outside the back door now. These days I'm in the States. Last year it was 6 times, 4 times so far this year. Often that's only for 2 or 3 days. This time it's been for 3 weeks, which has been fantastic because, yeah, I've been to visit places and meet other people and just be a bit more relaxed around the time I've been able to spend with my clients. So what initially drew you to the art of bespoke shoemaking? As I said, it was never a conscious decision. During my 12 years or so with Bill, where the work was sort of necessarily focused on the client foot condition and the function of the shoe to support the client needs, you know, that was a good place to start, but I've covered this a bit already. You know, I was craving to do something a bit different. And the shoemakers that I took over in Chiltern Street, I think the single most important thing perhaps that's happened in my career is that they had been in that premises since 1937, and they had lasts in there made throughout the period from 37 to the day I was there. And they were Greek Cypriot shoemakers, and they did a little sort of semi-production. They bought in ranges of lasts for different styles of shoe, and you could immediately see what was a last that had been made for a 1950s pointy-toed stiletto or a 1940s elegant boulevard shoe. And so I had this enormous archive of a number of thousands of lasts, and okay, they were in standard sizes, but over a period of time I began to realize every time I met a new client and looked at their feet and understood what type of footwear they wanted, in my mind I could relate that to a range of lasts that I'd got. So then, along with their last drafts, all their measurements, the impressions that we take, photographs, everything I take to the last maker, I would take one of these model lasts and I would say, can you keep these certain style elements of this last, but incorporate my client's measurements? And that has proved so significant for me because those lasts made in those years understood women's feet. And in the UK, we've lost the continuity of women's last making. Essentially, Springline are the only commercial last makers in the country. And just because the way the whole industry has evolved in the UK, we have a tiny women's industry. So where historically within the last makers there would have been ladies' men making women's lasts, and men's men or gentlemen's men, or however they used to refer to it. Now the last, I deal with one bespoke last maker within the larger last making company, and he has to revert from men's work onto my work, and you know, something is lost because I'm not simply looking for a last for a 2-inch heel with a round toe. You know, I'm looking for far more nuances in the shaping of the last. So having that resource of all those archive lasts has been invaluable to me and to John within last makers. And I get a bit nerdy about last because I feel that they're so little understood, and yet there's so much taught about design of shoes. But the design of the last for me comes first. You know, people always say, and I understand it, that my shoes have this real sort of vintage look, but again, that was not a conscious decision. It was because the lasts that I was choosing to use had the volume and the shape within them that immediately create the look of a vintage or a dated shoe. Whereas, to my mind, very often, a shoe that started its life on a piece of paper and then a last is found to interpret that and design onto. Sometimes the last has to be really compromised in order to reflect the design. So, which is great in the fashion world and what have you, but obviously that's not really the world I inhabit. I inhabit this sort of odd world with private clientele that have requirements to be fitted properly, I suppose you would say. The other thing about the lasts is that currently, I'm sort of digressing from this, but do you think it matters if I just talk as it? So these days, if I have a new client, I ask them for a minimum order of 3 pairs of shoes or boots across 3 different last shapes or heel heights, because particularly when they're at a distance, these women, I keep saying, they don't really need my shoes at all, so they're excited about it. They want to get these shoes. They don't want to wait through loads and loads of fittings. So if we can be proving the fit of 3 pairs of lasts at the same time, then when I'm seeing them next, I'm making the shoes or boots all the way through to completion without doing any fitting, because when they see a finished shoe, they're immediately excited about it. And given my years of experience, if it doesn't fit pretty well, you know, I need to be ashamed of myself. Mostly they will fit, but if there is any issue at all with the fit, that shoe becomes my mock-up, which is an absolute true representation, because I've used the same construction method, the same leathers and materials that the real shoe is going to have. So then we can go back and just start that shoe from start again. And I've found that to be a much happier sort of way to work. So some clients will have, it's a way that seems to be evolving at the moment, is that they may start with those 3 pairs of lasts. With what we've learned from those, if they then require other lasts for other types of footwear, heels, toe shapes, we've got enough information in the already existing lasts to go right into making the new lasts and making the new shoes and going. So this has been, yeah, quite a happy sort of revelation, really. Just gonna. So the process is that I meet a client, hopefully in their home, so that I can see their style, their wardrobe, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's in a hotel room if they're coming through London, it could be in business premises. But I obviously take measurements, take last drafts, take as much information as I can get. And
I think what's great about the collaboration you have now though is that they've come to know your style and can trust you to kind of just take on.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. If they've found me because they've seen my website, then we've already got a sort of bit of a rapport because they've been drawn into something about my aesthetic. And I try to guide them with their first shoes into having something similar to something that's already exists. Obviously not something with lots of embroidery or lots of fine detail. And when they've had 2 or 3 pairs and we built up trust between us, then we go on to looking at more, you know, flamboyant or more involved sort of designs. Yes, so yes, I've already covered all that. Sorry, skipping through this. Sorry? Machines. Okay, talk about your machines. Okay, so we've cut right down to yeah, this is the early days. I've just got one faff. Is it a 591 or something? Post machine. Yeah, and that's about it. There is a little nipping press there somewhere, but we skive entirely by hand. I've got nothing against skiving machines, but you know, if you're doing a run of work that's all the same leather and you can set it up, great. But when you're swapping and changing all the time, and I thoroughly enjoy skiving, and I enjoy, you know, keeping my knife beautifully sharp, and it's all for me part of the pleasure. Hand welted work, no machinery involved. Everything is finished by hand. My maker, who does my heel cemented work, he does have a very simple finishing machine with just two cogs on it. Yeah, that really is it for machinery. Oh, the machine I have had in the past and don't currently, but definitely would like to if I had space, is a splitting machine, because most of the leathers we use are skins as opposed to hides. They're small because of the finer nature of most of the work we're doing. So I always want to be using a leather where I've got the full substance, I've got the hair and the flesh side, so that the strength and the character of the leather is not compromised at all. But to have it as thin as I want it, it needs to be a really small animal, which is fine. But there's always occasions where a splitting machine, particularly maybe just for heel covers, or perhaps, I can't quite think at the moment, there's always some little job. Sometimes if we're doing some of that embossed work that you might have seen on Instagram or whatever, we might just want to take, you know, a fraction of the side, of the flesh side, and yeah, so that's definitely on my agenda to have again in the future. Time consuming projects. Yes, we do far too many really time consuming projects. Increasingly, we're doing a lot of hands work in the upper. So Lily's, this entire thing is a boot. There's a lace behind. There's boning, which Lily's created the slots where the bones come down to give the shape. These are all vintagey pieces that the client owns, collars and little ribbon motifs and things. That's all been hand stitched on, but the entire upper is hand sewn. We've been doing a bit more beaded work recently, and quite often the uppers of beaded work need to be hand sewn around the top line or whatever, because you just can't get machine close to those little glass beads because they just ping off.
But the original base of this boot, because you've made one before,
Yes.
There's a hook and eye fastening on the inside here, and when Caroline showed it to John Galliano, he suggested that we also cover the hook and eye so you can see the silver. So on top of the head, absolutely no machine and hand stitch, we then covered all the hook and eyes so they went silver.
Because I hadn't been involved in the couture world in those days, and I didn't know that, you know, that people cover little hooks and eyes with, you know, little tiny buttonhole stitch all the way around. And last year, John Galliano asked me to the Maison Margiela atelier and take some samples, and he was all over them. But that pair of boots that this one was based on, he picked me up on those on those hook and eyes. So these ones are done correctly.
It was a nice book.
Yeah. What's your typical lead time for a bespoke project? It's difficult to say. A new client coming in now, it would be something between probably 18 months and 2 years for those first 3 shoes or boots to come through. Existing clients where we've got existing lasts, or we know so much about them that we can create another last pretty quickly. Work invariably will be able to be done more quickly for them, but I have a core number of clients who've been with me sort of 15 years or more, and they just always have orders in the pipeline so that they know there's always something coming out at the other end. So, you know, invariably there'll be 6 or 8 orders. When I was in Texas last weekend, a client ordered 9 pairs and she already had 2 pairs on order. And since I got back from Texas, she's been in touch with another couple of orders. So she knows that they're not going to go through for some time, but just thinks, you know, better get, you know, how long is Caroline going to exist? But 50 would be a lot. 50 would be a lot. Yes, that's Lily and myself, and really 3 workers. You know, 3 months if we're lucky. Yeah, 3. Yes, it seems to come in sort of waves. Well, as the orders come in, you know, 3 orders come in, you go through a stage and to another stage. And then...
Yeah, I suppose it's the difference between new clients or existing clients saying last cemented or gives you a relative.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, if they do this. Right, okay, projects. What is your favorite pair of shoes that you've made and what makes it special? These were made quite a lot of years, at least 15 years ago, I would think, for a Russian client, but it's a silhouette that I use over and over again. These are my own shoes I was thinking wearing tonight, but essentially it's the same silhouette. It's a boulevard heel. It's a high vamp, a platform, really lovely and stable but can be given all sorts of different treatments like this hand embroidery. Currently got an order from a client for a pair of long fitted boots, but inspired by these. And the clients asked that the embroidered panels on the length of the legs should have an Eastern European folk feel. And Lily's been beavering away for weeks and weeks and weeks, and whether we'll ever see our money back or not, no idea. But
look good then.
they look fantastic. This is a cut steel original Georgian buckle, and again, the client who's ordered the boots wasn't going to be fobbed off with any of the buckles I could show her, so I had to hunt down a really good pair of Georgian buckles, which I've now found and got ready to go on the boots. I've always liked a shoe with a high vamp. You know, if necessary, you can have an elastic underneath that buckle, but you know, you're being held at the upper instep, which means you know, you can have the fuller toe area, you know, which is comfortable. I try as much as I can to avoid a low cut pump. All of those of you that have done it know that they may look the simplest, but they're by far the hardest to fit, to get a good fit. You're far better off doing, I've got one there, that slightly, but you know, something that's got a shape in it, or is an enclosed back and an enclosed front, so that you don't get gaping then, but you still get, you know, if they're looking for, you know, an evening shoe or something, you cut out so many of the problems. Favorite pair of shoes?
Most challenging project.
Oh, most.
Yes.
There's just too many challenging projects. Too many difficult things. In the early days, it always was about the fit and the client. And I don't know if some of you have experienced this, but like in the early days when my price point was low for what I did, but high for what the client was paying, because they were perhaps people like all of us who would buy on the high street and would have a sort of price that they found acceptable for a pair of shoes. But because of their foot condition, they had to go into this specialist area. But often, I expect so, you will have experiences, you know, it can come with some resentment that you've got to be paying this money, and that can be quite challenging. And it can also mean that they're insisting on lots of fittings that nobody's benefiting from. They're taking up your time. You know, it's really, really challenging. And I am pleased to put a lot of that, you know, behind me, quite honestly. Current challenges are really of my own making, because I come up with ideas that I want to see through. And sometimes I got a current one, an embroidered shoe for a client. It was going to be a mule, and I decided that I wanted to do the embroidery on an even weave fabric, and I set up a big frame. I'm sure some of you know, that in itself takes a long, long time to do. And I embroidered for, I don't know how many hours, well over 100 hours on that. And the idea has been coming to, this isn't going anywhere, this isn't coming together right. And, you know, kept going a bit further and a bit further, and just put a line under it, But I've come up with a better idea, I hope. And I've got to go back and get on with that shoe, because I'm committed to finish that one before Christmas. So they are of my own making very often. The footwear trends thing, I have to admit, I don't really keep up to date with things. And I suppose my client base, although they can be very, very fashionable women and who wear couture and what have. It's not necessarily what they're looking for, but what I put here was that I think some of you will know of the website shoeicons.com. It's a private Russian shoe museum, and the owner of it, Nazim, is a fantastic shoe historian and has the largest private collection of shoes in the world. And he's got a number of my shoes, and whenever he receives one, he always sends a wonderful testimonial. And on one occasion he wrote, "Caroline, your work is absolutely original. You're inspired by many, but do not copy anyone, just like the great designers do." On another occasion he said, "Thanks, Caroline. I just cannot say how much I enjoy your work. Most important thing is that you not only design the models, but you do it with your own hands. If I were to compare your shoes to anything I have in my collection, I would have chosen Epron d'Or or the shoes of Jan Tournay. This is why I always ask myself when I see a new pair of your shoes, I can understand somebody eager to own them, but to wear them, they should be adored, just like a piece of art. Thank you for supporting the idea that shoemaking can be a form of art, not just a money-making business." So, you know, feel humbled by that. I mean, you know, somebody with his knowledge and insight into shoes. My most enduring client relationships have been with those clients who themselves have sought me out. I do work for them. It's often a combination of orders relating to my new ideas that they want to support for me, but also quite often a repeat of something they've had previously, maybe in a different color or whatever. How do you balance artistic expression with the functional aspects of a shoe? This is always a tension. The subjective nature of a bespoke shoe being about the client foot, shape and condition, etc. It's not easy. All I can say is that my 35 plus years of experience, you know, help. Can you share a memorable experience with a client? In London, in the early days, around about 2003, I think, my first really wealthy client who was buying simply because she wanted me to make her shoes, not because she had any particular needs with her feet. And she was my first multi-ordering client, and she was gorgeous, sort of vivacious. She'd come in like a whirlwind into the shop, and she'd often just come in and sit down and tell me a story about a pair of my shoes. Maybe she'd been wearing the night before and things that had happened. There was always a story came with every shoe that Philippa had. There was one pair of shoes that I'd been particularly proud of. They were very high platform with a polka dot, and she never ever mentioned them. And so one day I said to her, "Philippa, you know, is there an issue with those polka dot shoes? Because, you know, if there's a problem, I need to know about it." And she sort of coyly sort of grinned at me and was sort of deciding whether she was going to tell me or not. She said that I knew they were in the process of moving house from one location in London to another in the West End. And they'd got small children, and the first one was about to start school. And her husband, who was an American hedge fund manager, he collected erotic art, and up to that date, before they left that house, the art was throughout the house. With the children getting older and bringing children home, she decided, okay, with the new move to the new house, she would ask her husband, would he put it in storage or just keep it in his study or whatever it might be, and he obviously agreed to do that. So as a thank you to him, she had a series of nudes done of herself just wearing these shoes, and she had them bound into a leather ledger and put into his study desk drawer for his Christmas present that year. So that always, gave me a smile. Kiko says, I see you create some shoe sculptures. Can you tell us the story behind these pieces? We'd had an exhibition some years ago, and a guy came into the exhibition, and we had some of our, more exotic stuff was on display, and he said that he was doing a renovation of a Regency apartment in Cheltenham, which is a town close by to us, and he was having quite a dramatic interior done, and he wanted a statement piece, and he just sort of threw it out as a commission. Could you do a highly stylized pair of shoes? And I don't know quite how we got to this, but it was the first commission the last makers had of that sort, was to do the last and to fit the antler into it, and there's a brass socket within each foot and a brass rod from under the plinth. So these rotate so you can have them relating to each other in different positions.
We had the plinth made for us as well in the company, and you can't quite see it on this picture, but around the adverts there's solid silver vines.
Oh yes,
which
that's
then
solid silver interweaving all around there.
The leaves were embossed leather, but we couldn't use glue because it would tarnish the silver, so we came up with a method to wet mold everything, so there wasn't any glue that would tarnish over time.
Yeah. So whether we'll do any more of that, I just don't know. But it took forever. It had quite a lot of iterations along the way before it ended up like that. Again, you asked from a female angle, as a woman in a predominantly male industry, did you face any challenges entering the field? I think generally no. I was very fortunate, and in the main I was pretty welcome, but obviously I was in that part of the industry, with a very craft oriented area of the industry, and I was sort of searching out individual makers around Northampton and London, just trying to glean as much insight and education from them as I could. And what I found was that this would have been the late 80s, early 1990s. There was a whole generation of shoemakers that were coming to the end of their working lives, and actually I think quite enjoyed to share some time with me and give me some insight. And something that was often said was that I asked good questions. So I found, generally people being generous with their advice and wisdom. But I do realize, this is on the fringes of the industry. It's not like, going into a factory situation. Do you have a network of shoemakers who can bounce ideas or reach out to? Yes, yeah. Got some very, very good client and colleagues in the UK, and they're always available on the end of the phone or an email, or we meet up occasionally or whatever. And a lot of us work alone, and it's quite a lonely thing. It's nice to know that there are other people about that either share your experience or have knowledge of something that you're not so clued up on, and you can share it. So also work experience students that have been through my workshops over the years and generally remain close. Some of those have gone on into industry, and on occasions they've asked me if I can create a prototype for them because they're having difficulties with the factory possibly, and the young designer may want to prove their idea and factory saying it can't be done, and so I'm working through with them. So, all of those are really nice, satisfying things. How did you manage your time during the child rearing years? Did you adjust your working hours? I pretty much did a 9 to 5 really from the beginning, but fortunate with childminding and family and my living close by. As I mentioned, when I was first with Bill Bird, we did things on it every time I gained a bit more experience and was benefiting his business a bit more, he paid me a little bit more, and we got through it that way. And he afforded me really a lot of flexibility. We all know what it's like with family commitments and young children and things that happen at school or in the nursery or whatever, and you've got to be gone at a moment. So I was pretty fortunate in my circumstances then. I did 12 or 13 years with Bill, eventually becoming a full 50% partner. But when this opportunity came to take over the business in London, I had a vision of something I wanted to do. So I walked away. I just took my hand tools with me. I didn't force him into a sale of the business because, it wouldn't have been right. But future, what advice would you give to someone looking to pursue a career in bespoke shoemaking? It's just so hard.
Don't do it.
You've got to build experience. I mean, obviously you can go and learn things, you can go to workshops, you can get insight, but you've got to build your own experience. Nobody else can do that for you. You've got to work with your hands again and again and again. And, you've got to have a vision of what you want to do. And if you really want it enough, you'll make it happen. You need, as I've harped on about, you need to understand something about lasts. I had a circumstance some years ago where a woman came to me for bespoke shoes, and she said that she had very, very large feet, and she'd struggled all her life, and she'd moved to London from New Zealand and had heard there were good shoemakers in London. She didn't know how to find one, so she'd approached London College of Fashion because she knew that they had shoe courses, and she asked advice there for a bespoke shoemaker. And somebody at London College of Fashion told her that a student that had graduated the previous year was establishing themselves as a bespoke shoemaker. Well, that poor student, thinking you can be out of college one day and running a bespoke shoemaking business. She took the client's foot size and she sent to Springline for a pair of lasts, and she attempted to make shoes, and it just didn't come off. And when this woman came to me, she brought the lasts with her, and they bore no relationship whatsoever to the client's foot other than that they were the correct length, nothing else about them. And so no blame attached whatsoever to that student, but she'd been given no insight into what bespoke shoemaking really is. And, I feel the college, quite honestly, should have guided her better. So why did I go off on that one? Oh, yeah, advice for those wanting to. You need your method of proving the last, proving the functionality, the fit and everything. You need to work out how you're going to do that. You need, obviously, to be able to pattern, make clothes, and, choose your method of construction. You need to sort of design your process, how is it going to work from beginning to end. How many meetings are you going to have with the clients? You've got to be able to manage the business side. You might want to be a crafts person, but if you want to make money, you've got to be a business person at some level. So you've got to understand about cash flow. You've got to know how to price your work, and you haven't got to be afraid about pricing your work properly. You've got to understand what your own benchmark is and relate that to the price point, but don't undersell yourself, because it's hard to get up. And most of our clients will have had career trajectories, but most of us working with our hands don't have a clear career trajectory, but we build experience over years, and we deserve to be recompensed properly for that. So, look at every aspect of the work you do and put a price on it and add it all up, and then put a profit margin on the top. Bespoke shoemaking is about fitting the client both physically, psychologically, emotionally, and aesthetically. You get all sorts of situations with clients, and bespoke has to encompass it all. That is what bespoke means. It's about listening, discussing, and delivering. Takes experience in many areas. I talked about the pricing, and I think it's so important, really, really, really look after your clients. Give them service that is an experience for them and that they want to repeat and repeat, because one loyal client is worth so much more than a new client walking in the door every day. You build those relationships, and you have to learn how to behave within them. Yeah, definitely. What do you envision for the future of bespoke footwear, both for your brand and the industry as a whole? I believe that there's a really bright future. I really do, because how many people are interested in getting into the industry, and that equally is tempered by the number of people in my world, ultra high net worth people. Those people are growing in number, and they're all looking for something special and something different. And if you can evolve a business, a design, a product, or whatever that appeals to them, I suppose it is a situation quite often of patronage, and politically, and we are not talking politics this week, but it's not, perhaps it can be seen as distasteful, but I see it as, if there weren't these clients with this financial wherewithal to support businesses like mine, I would never get to indulge myself in the things that I really, really want to do. So
We've got 3 more to go.
3 more to go.
Questions?
Oh gosh. I hope I brought a little bit of insight into that. Master your craft, bring something of yourself to your designs. It's expensive, but where you can, get professional photographs of your work, because if you're not keeping imagery of your work and you haven't got time to make samples, how are you going to keep promoting yourself to people? And obviously in these digital days on our phones, we can all take great photographs, and it's not my forte, but do just record everything. It's just so important. So many crafts people don't, and then they just don't have anything to show. Understand small business. The cash flow is king. You know, without cash flow, you know, you just can't do anything. And yeah, it's hard. You know, there's setbacks, of course there's setbacks, but you know, you try and learn from everyone and improve next time around. But there's loads of luck in it all as well. Do you accept apprentices? No. I've done it in the past. As I explained before, geographical location things make it very difficult. But also, you know, there is that thing that in the early days you're giving so much of yourself to somebody, and you know, when the tipping point comes, they should be giving back into the business, and then a time comes where everything's equal and they're ready to move on. But as small business owners, you know, we can't afford to just be training people to a stage and they're moving on and never benefiting. And I made a decision 18 months, 2 years ago, when Lilly was already in the door, so I couldn't get rid of her. But that I want to find out what I can do with my remaining able years, and so I just don't want distraction. And I have done it a lot over the years, so I've got a clear conscience. Yeah, so I think we're there. What is your favorite tool in the studio? My knife. These are the 3 knives I've had over more than 35 years. These 2 I no longer use. This one I've used for at least 15 years. It's never ever seen a grinding machine. You don't need a bloody grinding machine unless you want to be replacing your knives, you know, every year or so. All you need is a good either whetstone or an oil stone, good strop, and be really conscious of the surface that you're skiving or click. I use this for clicking and skiving and opening cardboard boxes and all sorts of stuff that people tell me I shouldn't, but I'm constantly honing it. You just don't need anything better. I think it was a book on leather working tools that the mentors I mentioned, Val and Neil, gave me donkeys years ago, the history and something over leather working tools. It's a big book and it covers leather working tools in all disciplines, whether it's shoemaking, harness making, saddlery, fine leather goods, whatever it is. But the brilliant thing about the book is with each tool, there's a description of how that tool was used, and I found that a great insight. But also in there was a quote from someone from, I don't know when, saying that a good shoemaker can make a pair of shoes with a knife and fork. And that, obviously it's a bit extreme, but there is a truth in it. A decent knife, and if you've got the means to bend a fork to make your edge irons and things, you know, that's all you need. You know, people buy all their wonderful Japanese and German knives and, you know, have whole rugs of them, but they don't know how to sharpen them or how to skive properly. You know, you only need simple things looked after and treated properly. You stumped me on this one. What size and type of thread and needle do you use? And I just so poor with numbers, and I always know the thread is either 60 or 80, and it's the finer of the two, but I don't know which way around that is. That's mainly what we're using. It's a strong bond polyester. Again, with needles, the machine supplier in the UK that deal with FAF machines, they've got really good engineers, and I have my machine serviced every so often. But whenever I have a problem with needle or have a different sort of job and my needles don't feel appropriate, I phone them up and explain what I'm doing, and they'll send me a trial packet of something else. And there's so many numbers on those needles, and I never know what they relate to. All I can do is try them. If they work, then I put them in a bag and I'll write on them fine for X, Y, or Z, thicker for X, Y, or Z. And that's the only way I can somehow manage. Yeah, I think yes, yes, and actually Lily was mentioning earlier on that a fine edge isn't always just about the stitch length and the thread and the needle. It's also about setting the stitches. So when you've done your seam, it's just, you know, tap, tap, tap. You're not beating the bejesus out of the edge of the leather. You're just setting those stitches into that sandwich of the upper leather and the lining. And that just visually, it just makes an enormous difference. Yeah, I think we're there.
I'm curious about when you do the research or when you're trying new techniques or something that you have in mind. You say 100 hours. How long does it average take for you? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think you can sort of see from things you might be familiar with and some of the things here that some things I'm sort of repeating and trying out in different ways. So those can be really to get into. I've got lots of old embroidery books, and I'll look at different stitches in there that may be meant for an entirely different type of material, but I'll be thinking, oh, how could I utilize that in a leather project? You know, I'd just be sewing little pieces, trying them. Yeah, the piece. Yeah, really, it's materials, leathers, just sort of thinking about how I want to link them together, looking through different sort of books. I don't know quite, I just sort of
materials you would never use again.
Sort of never say that I don't like using patent, and most shoemakers don't, but clients always ask for it. Historically, patent leather was achieved by a method of heating and ironing and bringing. But of course, these days it's just a sprayed on surface, so it's just a plastic basically. And yes, I've got no love of that. I use a lot of suede, but always baby calf suede from Italy. Increasingly difficult to find really nice fine ladies' weight calf leathers. That's something I'm always looking for. Kangaroo we've used a lot. You know, kangaroo is excellent because, you know, nice thin substance, but really strong. That's a bit of a favorite, but in terms of I don't like, I suppose I don't use what I don't, it wouldn't come into my consciousness if it wasn't something that I like.
Bad experience or something.
One thing that I have found over the years is that I have one tannery in Italy that I've predominantly used over the years, but occasionally if they haven't had what I've wanted, I've gone to another Italian company, a tannery that's really known for its range of fine leathers, colours, all sold into the fashion world. And I can often find there what I think is right, but actually the reality is often, because those leathers are made for a machine lasting technique, that actually, you know, you can make your upper and be really pleased with it and then go to last it over a toe and you get bursting. And it's simply because those are essentially being made for the fashion world. They're going to be lasted in a certain sort of way, and yes, so that can be very disappointing.
Have I got any questions?
Yes, Yes,
You mentioned the word condition of the person's foot.
yes.
So what type of background do you need to assess the condition?
Mm.
Like, I don't know, like, do you consult with an orthopedist or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I really tried to get away from in my early days working with Bill Bird. That was his area, that's what he was passionate about. But essentially, he understood it not from a medical background, but from a biomechanical perspective, and just through observation and trial and error what would work for clients. Something that I know a lot of shoemakers in my past certainly have found difficult is working with podiatrists who are producing orthotics, because there's always this tension between a podiatrist who may have that medical side, and they have that in terms of the client's understanding of their medical qualification, but they can produce orthotics without having to take any responsibility for the shoe within which they go. And so they may fit into trainers and casual shoes and things, but yeah, it's not a relationship I like to get into. There's a lot of time when the condition of the foot is not a serious medical condition, but it's a discomfort for the client, because we don't produce width fitting, or very rarely are high street manufacturers producing width fittings. So even really high street shoes have to accommodate the most types of people's feet. So inevitably they end up, being really wide here. Well, if you've got a narrow foot and you're not being held properly, that's tiring to wear a shoe like that. So there's a lot of this minor foot condition that really aren't foot conditions. They're about the foot being held properly in the first place, and a well-fitting shoe made on an appropriately shaped last is all that's required. Anybody else? Yes.
Would you consider showing more of your work in progress on your social media or?
Yeah. Do I've been through all these situations where, at different times over the last number of years, different people have run my social media. They've all got a different attitude about what should be going on there and how it should be being handled. I suppose I'm in the business of promoting my work to my client base. So we do loads of photographs of work in progress to keep us a record of an archive for each shoe or each client.
To remember processes.
Yeah, to remember. So it's an aid to ourselves. But I also think I appreciate that other students and shoemakers and people enjoy to see that insight. But there is also, it depends the audience you're reaching out to, and there's something about, the mystery of the shoemaker. I mean, personally, I feel one-to-one with shoemaking colleagues or students, I'm very open about what I do, but I sort of don't feel the need to put it.
Question?
Yes.
I have a question. From your perspective, what is so special about John's Lob?
No. Yeah. Yeah. John Lobb. There are two John Lobbs, some of you will know. It was originally one business in the West End in St James's in London. At some stage in the early 20th century, they opened an atelier in Paris. Eventually, that atelier was bought out by Hermes. So there's now a high street ready-to-wear John Lobb, which is nothing to do with Lobb on St. James, the handwork. Confusingly, the French company do have factories in the UK, and they do some bespoke and welted work. But I think who you're referring to, that I've had a long association with in the West End, the thing about them is that they have really been there consistently for so long, and they've provided the training ground for all the other shoemakers really today. So we have others like Cleverly, Foster, who don't exist any longer, unfortunately. But those other West End companies benefited from the apprentices that were trained through Lob. They were the only one that were of a sufficient size that they could be training a number of apprentices. And sorry, I've got a pocket in my ear. Those apprentices, as they became master shoemakers, they would go out to be outworkers available to Lob, but then also available to other shoemakers. That's how most of the West End has worked, because of the ups and downs of the trade, so that the bigger companies aren't taking responsibility for employing a whole number of craftsmen at any one time. They're out there as piece workers in the world and available to other people. But I think, you know, most of us would have a respect for them because they have kept going all these years. Historically, they've done some, you know, really wonderful work. Obviously, there's others that do it too now. Yeah. Have you ever been into there?
No.
You should. They're always very welcoming, and generally, if you know, tell them you're interested in shoemaking, somebody will take you down into the basement and show you what's going on down there.
Question about design process with the client.
Yes.
Through the initial meeting, you get an idea of what the client wants. But
Yes.
do you have a lot of range? Do they give you kind of full reign on what you would make for them?
And eventually some do, and you know, it may be a mixture of something I'd really like to do for them, and they'll say, okay, you know, go ahead and indulge yourself. But I also want X, Y, or Z, which is something on their wish list. As I was mentioning, at the beginning of a relationship with a client, I tried to get them to have something similar to something I've done before, hopefully a fully enclosed shoe, so that we're learning as much about the foot as possible before going into more varied things. Yeah, every client is so different, and I don't have hundreds of clients. You know, I have, you know, a core of maybe 6 that have been with me for years and years and years, and always have shoes on order. Others who dip in for a few years and move on again, or their circumstances change. Most recently, a few new American clients come to me really through a contact in haute couture. An American guy who worked in Paris for years and has represents Chanel, Dior, Schiaparelli, Gaultier to his American clientele, and he brings Chanel into their own homes with the models or whatever, you know, they just bring them around the world. And those clients have a different type of requirement. Generally, they are just having more conventional, formal evening shoes, things that just support the couture, that don't, yeah, they're not going into all of this stuff. But you know, it's very nice to have that sort of insight into that world and sort of bread and butter work. Yes.
What happened to women's footwear making?
Yeah, sorry, fast fashion. Yes, yes. So we had centres in Leicester and in Norfolk of pretty good women's shoemaking, but I think probably, during my lifetime, that's just about entirely gone. I don't know if any of you will know Gina Shoes. They're London-based. They are high-end shoes. They mainly service the sort of Middle Eastern market, so quite blingy, lots of Swarovski crystals. But the quality of the shoemaking is really, really high. They're the only real current success story I know of.
Just men are probably more likely to order bespoke shoes.
Yes.
A staple shoe will do them for multiple reasons, whereas I feel like we like choice.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And I think it was, obviously mass production. The factories we had in the UK would have maybe been, I don't know, a couple of hundred people, but then, initially Spain and Portugal were creating brilliant shoes, bigger factories, cheaper. Because of the economies of scale, and now, of course, the Far East. So you just cannot be competing with that, with our minimum wages, with the cost of our living in the UK. There's nowhere to compete, as I understand it, unless you are not in the mass-produced industry, only if you're in sort of bespoke, or if you're in something highly design-led. Yeah. Anybody else?
Did you ever make men's shoes?
I have done. I have one guy that I do make for on occasion, but it's not something that I encouraged at all, because it is more unusual to find somebody working in the women's world, and largely the men's world is, really pretty well catered for these days.
Even with the sort of new way of sort of footwear making that really isn't yeah,
It's bloody hard. It's so hard, and I'm only still here just because I just kept on plugging away at it. But it is that, we've said this a few times recently, in the men's world of bespoke shoemaking, okay, they have got a few different styles, but essentially they're at one sort of heel height, they're a lace up of Oxford or Derby, or they're a loaf or something, and they're black, brown, or just, but the variety of what we do. And it came to me the other day, I don't know who the person was, but said of Ginger Rogers, she did exactly what Fred Astaire did, but she did it going backwards and in high heels. And that's what I think, we do. And I suppose I've had sort of an odd experience along the way, each part of which has helped contribute to my understanding of how to do this. But I can't quite imagine one place in which you could go and learn to do it. It's that you could go and learn the design side and sort of technical things. But yes. Yeah, sorry, I'm really having trouble. My ears are popping for some reason, but you said, what did I feel about the mental side? Should we perhaps sort of go back to basics, think about what drew you into it in the first place, what you loved about it, you know, keep trying, working with your hands. I think, you know, what I always try to get over to people is, if you've got a passion for it and you've got some basic hand skills, you can just do so much without the need for a sophisticated workshop with lots of equipment. I think, you know, look into yourself into what first turned you on for it and see if there's a way you can sort of navigate back to that.
Kind of related to a little bit, maybe, other than footwear, do you love gardening?
There's no room for anything else.
Gosh, it doesn't exist. I like drink.
Do you make all of your own shoes?
No.
Really?
No, I came here wearing some shopboard shoes. I put these on because I thought I've got to wear something tonight, but I didn't make these for myself. They were made on a standard last, so they don't fit me perfectly, so I didn't want to walk here in them. Yeah, they've got a particularly nicely shaped stacked heel. I brought these because I thought I might have worn them. I had these years. I rarely wear high heels, but when I do, these are my sort of go-to. But quite honestly, I just don't. I do have a number of pairs of shoes I've made, and when I'm meeting clients, I obviously have my own shoes, but I just couldn't afford the time to be making. I'd be earning. But you say about my interest, I do have grandchildren, and you know, that is the quite honestly, the time I spend with them is the only time I completely sort of switch off to all of this. Yeah, everything that used to be a hobby is now part of the work with sewing and everything.
The book that's up in the back, what is the name of that?
This one it's my book. I've only got a couple of copies here, but we did bring. We could perhaps pass them around. I've only got a couple left.
I've heard that this skill is all stuff. It's not a cover.
Yeah,
You can see
that is this one here. Yeah.
Wow. That's still beautiful.
So I did the book really because I didn't want to do a brochure of styles. I wanted to do a book that I could give to clients that would sort of introduce them to my work and understand what my passion is, and wouldn't date or anything.
It's that leather layers, it's silk, and then it's like silk. Yeah. Do you have a dowel in there?
Yes, split pin. Yeah, yeah.
Would that go in after?
Yes, yeah. Yes, drill.
You drilled it.
Drill.
Yes, got it.
So you drilled all of your heels yourself?
No, the spring line carve all the heels for me. So we have heels constantly being made for each different last. And
So I had to learn to do wider heels because when I tried to get people to make them, they never come out right.
Yeah, it's getting. The thing is, heel making. If you make a heel for this isn't pitch right, but having a heel just made to last isn't enough really. The heel maker needs to understand what the shoe is. So obviously if it's a sling back or an open back shoe, there's not going to be any stiffener in there, so that's going to make the pitch different. A welted boot, and if I was making a cemented boot on this last, the heel would be different because the depths are different. Some shoes only have an insole, but more often my shoes have an insole and a heel seat. So then that's thicker again. So the guy making the heel needs to know, you know, what I'm putting inside there in order to get that union right. Prior to Springline making my heels, Colin Gibson in Norfolk made my heels for years and years and years. He'd come out of the women's industry, a factory that had closed down in Norfolk. But he was brilliant, and he was a real loss to the trade some years ago. Died far too young, but I was so fortunate he left all his equipment to me, which was very well, more than touching. I'm completely honoured, quite honestly. And I was able to take a lot of that with me to Springline, because I would love to do all that stuff myself, but if I do everything myself, nothing's going to get done, quite honestly. It's not going to come out the other end. But it's engaging with the people that are doing it for you to find out.
Right.
How to
Have a lot of inventory of heels. Is that the one thing that you kind of collected? Really hard to get, or to develop?
I mean, you know, when we left that last premises, quite honestly, we just gave away, burned, got rid of the unit, because we've got the boxes of the stuff.
Like a glass to keep warm for them.
You did, yes.
They will be glass though. They'll get the
Yeah. You know, in Springline, they've got boxes and boxes of my model heels, and we're currently, these are really old ones. That was 94. We're up to about 160 something heel models they've got. But the thing is, every client last is different. So even though you might want this heel, this heel's got far too wide a heel seat for this last. So I'm still going to have that remodeled to fit this last. So that's all absorbed into
too much.
No.
Yeah. So just
I'm
for
generally, I'll order, for one shoe, I'll order 2 pairs of heels for that shoe, just in case something goes wrong. And if nothing goes wrong, hopefully that just goes in the box with the client's stuff. Eventually they may order a shoe again that requires that heel, but otherwise we keep a catalogue what all the heels are and who they were for. Phone up Springline, or I go there and have them repeated.
So they don't have any minimums then? They just custom do it for you.
They just custom, but obviously at a cost.
Yeah.
You know, so I think currently to have a new model done is, don't quote me on this, but something like £150, and then repeats of that. It used to be 15. I think they might be nearer 20, £24, something like that now for repeats. But the initial, the same with the last making, you know, I don't know how many of you, but obviously a lot of bespoke makers make their own lasts or have rough turn lasts, which they do their own adjustments to. But everything is made for me to my direction, but that isn't ever the end of the story. They come back to me, we check them over, and invariably we'll want to put a fitting on them somewhere because we just realise it'd be safer if we did this before we do that. And so that, I mean, that is a hard part of the process, is the interaction with other people and them understanding what you fire off them. But inevitably over a long period of time you build relationships, you understand each other.
I said there's still industry left.
Yeah.
So you can go to people.
Yeah.
About, including finding kind of stuff. I think
Yes.
there's more stores in the UK.
Do you?
Yeah.
This
That's
is a bigger
bigger industry. Yeah, true. Right.
And on the men, on the gents end, yeah.
But like the hardware that you were trying to find, you
Yeah.
can go somewhere and find it, or is it more like
Yeah,
scour the website?
sometimes we have things made, but I mean, when I haven't this time, but often when I'm in New York, I do go to the garment district and look for buckles and bits and pieces there. since we've gone through Brexit in the UK, things have generally become more difficult with Italy and Europe. So, you know, Italy obviously was always the place to go. But, you know, so many of those places have large minimum orders. And so you need to meet these people face to face to sort of explain what you do and get them to let you have half a dozen pairs or whatever it is you may need. But yeah, but harvesting off secondhand clothing shop, you know, see shoes, the good buckles or whatever, and just get what you can. But boot buttons, you know, I'm always buying whenever I see them. Obviously, Etsy is good source for all these things. Sometimes, you know, I buy more than I need sometimes because you sort of see something you have no use for, but you sort of think that will come in at some stage. And you're welcome. Thank you so much for hosting me. Everybody for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to kind of take a look at it.
Yes, yeah.
You're coming from.
Yeah.
Some stories, lots of swatches that are like experiments.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
little,
very
just little trials, just little trials things.
And it's, I'm gonna turn the lights on so
Okay.
people can see.
Right.
And then I just want to say thank you all. I'm Sarah Nolan from Footwear and Accessory Design here at FAT, and I want to thank Keiko and Caroline and Lily. This is really fun. Please eat all these goodies. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for hosting us.